Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to Class 2 of the Book of Lost Tales Part 2 as we prepare to finish the Tale of Tinúviel this evening. First off, let me apologize. I'm struggling to get over a pretty bad head cold this week, so I hope my voice won't get too painful to listen to. It's been okay so far, but we'll see what happens. So anyway, I apologize for not being in peak condition here tonight. But anyhow, so I before we start, two quick announcements. First, as I mentioned last time, I just wanted to remind you, especially those of you who are in the American Northeast, that we are now 10 days away from our Lord of the Rings movie marathon in Arlington, Massachusetts, in Boston. So it's gonna be really great. I'm really excited. We've had a bunch of new signups this week, and a bunch of people I'm really excited to see. Folks I haven't seen in a few years, who are going to be able to. Who are going to be joining us. So, definitely if you're in the area. Nancy says it's not a great time to go to Boston. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, 4 feet of snow is a great time to come to Boston. Roads are fine. Roads are fine now. It's all good. But anyway, I understand. I understand. But especially if you're in the Northeast anyway. I mean, seriously. Like, what's the harm? But anyway, as I strongly recommend you look into this. I think it should be a great time. So please do look into that. If you know people up in the area, definitely spread the word. We're the more the merrier at an event like that. It should be a lot of fun. So. The second announcement, and this is just sort of an ongoing thing that I don't think I've mentioned here in the Academy before, but I wanted to mention a new sort of fun initiative we've been doing at Mythgard over the last couple months. Has been a kinship that we've started up on the Lord of the Rings Online, the video game. It's been really cool. I got a chance to meet the senior lore developer at Turbine, the company who makes the Lord of the Rings Online, last August, and I was just really, really impressed by his work and the really interesting thought that they've put into, the care that they have put into in adapting Tolkien's work into that video game world. I've been. So I was convinced finally to log in and see it myself, and I've been really blown away. It's really cool, so we've actually started. We have not only a Mythgard kinship and a bunch of Mythgard people sort of hanging out in game together, but I've also begun doing weekly sort of mini lectures and sort of combined with questing trips and skirmishes and things like that in game every Monday night. We call it Mythgard Mondays in Lotro. So if you happen to play the Lord of the Rings Online and you want to join us or hear what it's all about, I actually just gave a talk in the game this past Monday. We had a live audience of about between 60 and 70 people, all sitting around in the courtyard outside the Bird and Baby pub in Delving in the West Farthing. It was really fun. It was really neat. So anyway, I've been really enjoying my time there, talking about sort of exploring the game world and talking about the some of the choices they've made and the way that they've developed some of their stories and the adaptations that they've done. I think it's been something I've been really enjoying, and so I just wanted to let you guys know, people who have played the game, if you didn't know that we were doing that. I wanted to make sure you guys did know, so you can connect with us there, sort of another way for us to kind of explore Tolkien's world together. Nick, we're on the Landreval server, is where the Mythgard kinship is located, and so it's the Landreval right now. The schedule might change a little bit down the road. We're going to start doing some live streaming of our Lotro events through Turbine's official channels. Actually, we've been talking with the Turbine people, and they want to work with us on that. So we're gonna hopefully make that happen sometime in the next couple months. But for now, we meet on the Landreval server at the Bird and Baby pub in Delving at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. on Monday nights, as I said. So so definitely join us. Nick, look us up. We're the Mythgard Kinship. If you've got any if you've got any alts who aren't into kinship, we'd love to have you come join us. It's been a lot of fun. My character's name is Wigand, by the way, Wigend. This was sort of a kind of a general Tolkien themed idea. The word, it's just an Anglo-Saxon word that means warrior, because he's a guardian. So I was making a warrior character, and I'm like, I'll name him Warrior in Anglo-Saxon. That's just what Tolkien would do. So anyway, Wigand is my character on Landroval. So definitely look us up. It's a lot of fun. So okay, and I know a couple of you, Yana and Kay, have both joined, and I've seen them a lot. Kay says she got her reading done in no time this week by reading while swimming around in Lake Evendim. Yeah, Kay, you can certainly get some stuff done while swimming from one end of Lake Evendim to another. I've been there. I know just what you're talking about. Lake Everswim, as people in the game tend to call it. But anyway, those are my two announcements for this week. Now let's first of all, one last very quick question. I think some people are having some audio problems. I just wanted to make sure most of you can hear me. I don't see any issue on my end, but I just wanted to make sure that at least most of you can hear me. Okay, good. Excellent. All right. Then let's move along. Let's get back to the Tale of Tinúviel. So, one quick thing I wanted to clarify before we jump back into the text here. I want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about what I'm saying or what I'm implying about the Tale of Tinúviel in particular and the Book of Lost Tales in general. When I'm doing the contrast with the Silmarillion, in particular, the kind of things that we were discussing about the Tale of Tinúviel last time, and the particular ways in which it is different from the sort of the overall quality of the Silmarillion story. And I realize even that word quality is perhaps ambiguous in exactly the way that I'm talking about. I don't want you to think that I'm either criticizing or worse, mocking the Tale of Tinúviel. In contrast, my point is not at all to say that this is just like an inferior, shoddy piece of work compared to the Silmarillion later on. Now, do I think the Silmarillion version is better? Yeah, sure, of course I do. I think it's better, and I think that many of the changes that he makes are changes for the better. And yeah, this is only a rough draft and all that kind of thing. But that's not my point, really. And I want to make sure that it's clear that that's not my point. Even when I said just a second ago that there's a different quality, and I don't mean quality in the sense of like it's better or worse. I mean there's just a different tone. It has a different nature than the Silmarillion story does, and I'm trying to identify that particular the quality that makes the Tale of Tinúviel different from the story in the Silmarillion, because I find that pretty striking. And what's more, I think it's a really cool place to start. I mean, of course we started because it's chapter 1 of this book, but I think it makes a pretty good launching off point for this class, joining the Book of Lost Tales kind of in the middle, as it were. Because through this, I think the Tale of Tinúviel serves in part, at least kind of thematically in some sort of sense, as a kind of recap of what we saw before. Because I think the relationship between the Tale of Tinúviel and the Silmarillion story of Beren and Luthien is similar, sort of parallel to the overall difference in quality or flavor between the Book of Lost Tales as a whole and the later Silmarillion as a whole. They're not identical. I mean, they're not different in all of the same ways. But I think there are some parallels there that make this a really interesting place to start, because it sort of can remind us of things that we saw back in part 1, when we did the first volume of the Book of Lost Tales. and then sort of prepare us for moving forward. I think that and of course we're going to continue discussing this tonight, looking at sort of where this story is going and how it differs, and in particular, the first the first 6 passages that I want to look at. That's up through the scene with Tinúviel before Melko. Again, it's in particular that tone, and it's the way that the whole... See, notice I keep using words like quality, tone, flavor, register of this story, and I hope you see what I'm trying to get at here. It's not about the details being different. It's about the overall approach, the overall feel of this story is just different, which suggests to me this is a different kind of story. We have and the story seems to demand that we have a different kind of relationship with it than the Silmarillion story asks us to have with it. And so that's, my goal for this, again, is not to suggest or claim that the older version is merely inferior or immature or something like that. Because I don't think that's the case. There are places where you can go through Tolkien's draft and see, okay, I see this is his first kind of groping at this story that's going to mature and grow into this much better thing later on, right? There are places where you can simply see things like that happening. With the Tale of Tinúviel, I actively would disagree with somebody who said that. I mean, yes, of course, there are moments and there are times where we can see it's going to improve and get better, but again, it's not just going to get better, because that sort of suggests it's the same kind of thing, just more effective, right? Like, he's trying to achieve the same ends in both stories. He's just doing a better job of it in the one story than he is in the other. But I don't think that's the situation at all. I think the Tale of Tinúviel and the story, the Lay of Leithian, the story of Beren and Luthien, are really trying to achieve different ends. They're stories that are pointed in kind of different directions. And that's what I'm most interested in looking at, is trying to understand what is the direction that the Tale of Tinúviel is pointed at, because that, I think, is trying to sort that out is going to help us understand better what this whole thing is about. What was the Book of Lost Tales, right? When we're looking, because what we're looking at here is Tolkien's first attempt to build his mythology, right? His first attempt, remember the famous line from the preface to the second edition of the Fellowship of the Ring, that little prefatory sort of letter that he wrote at the beginning, the one where he talks about like how no, it's not World War II and everything. It's the bit that has his famous part about how he dislikes allegory and how people confuse applicability with allegory. In that passage as well, he says that the only intention on the part of the author in writing The Lord of the Rings was to write a really long story that would hold the attention of readers, and would delight them and amuse them and perhaps deeply move them. The Book of Lost Tales. Sorry, I'm gonna have to do the cough drop thing. Again, I apologize for my voice. In the Book of Lost Tales, we see his first attempt to do that. His first attempt to write a long story and to put this all together. Sorry. My voice just kind of suddenly gave out there. Let's see if I can get it back. All right. With that in mind, let's jump back into the text, and we're going to pick up more or less where we stopped. Actually, well, first let me go back to some of your comments here. All right. Michael Cheskowski points to, in his trying to delineate sort of those differences between the tone of the Book of Lost Tales, especially between the Tale of Tinúviel and the Silmarillion version. He's thinking about playful versus serious as the two major sort of terms that he uses there. And it's not that there aren't comical moments in the Silmarillion, but I think that's certainly a distinction that holds. I think there's more to it, and it's not just that he is more playful and joking in the Book of Lost Tales. But I agree. That's certainly I certainly agree that that's an important element. Okay, good. Now, Chuck Snow says, the question I've always have between the Tales and the Silmarillion is how much Christopher's editing has affected the stories in the Silmarillion. Well, that's like the whole reason Christopher Tolkien says in the prologue to the Book of Lost Tales Part 1 why he's doing the whole History of Middle-earth sequence in the first place. Is that basically, again, the story as he tells it, I'm not giving any inside scoop, I'm just saying what's in the prologue of Volume 1. He says that apparently when the Silmarillion came out, there was a mixed response, and one of the primary elements of that response from readers was, oh, okay, this is kind of cool, but how much of this is really Tolkien, and how much of this is Christopher? Is Christopher making up a lot of this stuff? And if so, what? And there were many people who kind of were making the assumption that it was kind of mostly Christopher. So they're like, is this Tolkien, or is this, close relation fan fiction that we're reading here? And so Christopher Tolkien's response was eminently scholarly, right? His response is the 13-volume, or 12-volume History of Middle-earth, right? I will, you're wondering? Here, I'll give you the entire history. So, Chuck, we can't draw firm conclusions on that is, on how much Christopher's involvement accounts for the difference by only looking at the Book of Lost Tales and the published Silmarillion, because we're still skipping, 10 volumes of the History of Middle-earth, in which we can see the Silmarillion material growing from the Book of Lost Tales through to the published Silmarillion at the end. And we have to really study all of that before we can really get the complete picture. But, nevertheless, to say that the History of Middle-earth series equips us more effectively to answer the question, how much, how weighty was Christopher Tolkien's influence, it's not the same thing as saying it proves that there isn't any, right? But anyway, I think, as I say, we still don't quite have enough data to be able to draw conclusions about that, at least on the basis of our own discussions, to really draw conclusions about that yet. Tom Hillman, as usual, has a very cogent comment on this. And I like your terminology, Tom. Tom says, the Book of Lost Tales has a far more fairy tale tone, while the Silmarillion has a mythic tone. It's more elevated, more cosmic. It is as if Tolkien simultaneously left behind the fairy tale tone with words like fae and fairies. Yes. The terms sound to me right. That is, Tom, that feels right. Fairy tale shifting to myth. But there's the one interesting thing there, right? That is, he was explicitly doing myth in the Book of Lost Tales. Right? That's how later on he characterized what the Book of Lost Tales was. And one of the differences that we can chiefly see is a greater sort of mythological element to it, or a certain kind of mythological element. And I've talked about this before, and we ended class last time looking at one of the major examples of it, that is the dog and cat stuff with Tevildo and Huan. That is, there is a particular kind of mythological story which is intended, which appears intended, which is calculated to explain particular phenomena, right? This is why this happens, right? This is why thunder follows lightning. This is why, the Nile floods every year. This is why, there are all kinds of stories like that in different mythologies, both to explain, meteorological phenomena or phenomena like why do dogs and cats behave like that, right? Why on earth do cats carry on like that at night? So we have a story, right, that explains it. That's one particular subspecies of myth, right, of mythology. And it is a kind of subspecies of myth which Tolkien's later works do very little of, but which the Book of Lost Tales is a great deal more interested in. And we see that cropping up again and again. We're going to come back to this much more when we look at his shift from the Ariel story to the Alfwine story at the end of the Book of Lost Tales Part 2. That's going to be one of the major things that's kind of at stake, I guess, when we look at that shift later on. So again, Tom, I want to say absolutely yes, I agree with that vocabulary. But there are myths and myths, right? So, I'm reminded, of course, as well. I'm reminded as well of the way in which Tolkien himself sort of depicted, or discussed a kind of continuity, right, between fairy tale and mythology, on fairy stories, right? When he sort of talked about how the two of them are related, and he talked about high fairy story and low fairy story. He clearly saw this as a kind of spectrum. So I think your dichotomy between fairy tale and myth, if we see it not as a binary, but as sort of two ends of a spectrum, I think that we can see a general, movement in one direction on that spectrum between Book of Lost Tales and the Silmarillion, and that would help to deal with this question of that other kind of mythology, right? Because the whole, the argument then that could be made is that kind of mythology is more towards the middle of that spectrum between, sort of simple fairy tale on the one side and, high sacred story on the other side. Okay. Still trying to recover my voice here. Okay. And I apologize for this. I am... whenever I get head colds like this, my voice is always kind of at risk of giving out on me like this. We'll see what we can do. One thing I will be trying to do is speaking more quietly. So we'll see. Okay. Okay, good. Let's see. I'm just looking over a few more comments. That's interesting. Don Standing says, maybe it's not a shift from fairy tale to myth, but rather a movement out of Victorian fairy tale. Maybe. It's certainly, as Tom was just referring to, there's that correlation, right, between this shift from fairy tale to myth. There's a correlation with the dropping of those traditional vocabulary terms, right, like fairy and fae. We're not going to call them fairies anymore. We're going to call them elves. And we're not going to call them fae anymore. We're just going to use the word Valar. And notice we're not even going to call them gods anymore, as he does in the Book of Lost Tales. And Silmarillion doesn't call them gods. So, okay. What... So, Don, coming back to your comment, in this sense, he is leaving the sort of the traditional vocabulary of Victorian fairy tales. Again, we're not going to be talking about fairies and goblins. We're going to talk about elves and orcs. We're going to be talking about the Valar, not the gods or the Fae. But I still don't think it's a question of abandoning Victorian fairy tale, because there is so much already that is mythic, even if mythic in that kind of middle ground sense in the Book of Lost Tales already. So again, I don't think it's a question of him just sort of abandoning that. And I know, Don, I'm sort of simplifying what you were saying, but anyway, but it definitely, it fits with the general thought, the general pattern that I'm seeing in the Tale of Tinúviel, is this tendency towards a general fairy tale approach compared to the far, greater? I mean, greatness is the word I used in the title. Again, not to imply the quality of the story, or again, here I am using my ambiguous vocabulary, the excellence of the story, but rather the size, the scale of the story. Loftier. Karita, that's a really good word. The loftiness of the story. It's less about excellence and more about altitude, in some kind of metaphorical sense. Yeah. More high, more big. Exactly, Karita. All right. Let's endeavor to advance the slide, which is kind of not working. Oh, there it is. Look at that. Now it's working too much. All right. Yet wild and rugged and very lonely were those days, for never a face of elf or man did they see. This is right after they escaped to Vildo, of course. And Tinúviel grew at last to long sorely for Gwendolen her mother, and the songs of sweet magic she was used to sing to her children, as twilight fell in the woodlands by their ancient halls. Often she half fancied she heard the flute of Dairon her brother, in pleasant glades wherein they sojourned, and her heart grew heavy. At length she said to Beren and to Huan, I must return home. And now is it Beren's heart that is overcast with sorrow, for he loved that life in the wood with the dogs, for by now many others had come to join Huan. Yet not if Tinúviel were not there. Nonetheless, said he, never may I go back with thee to the land of Artenor, nor come thee ever after to seek thee, nor come there ever after to seek thee, sweet Tinúviel, save only bearing a Silmaril. Nor may that ever now be achieved, for am I not a fugitive from the very halls of Melko, and in danger of the most evil pains to do any of his servants spy me? Now this he said in the grief of his heart at parting with Tinúviel, and she was torn in mind, abiding not the thought of leaving Beren, nor yet of living ever thus in exile. So she sat a great while in sad thought, and she spoke not, but Beren sat nigh, and at length said, Tinúviel, one thing only can we do, go get a Silmaril. And she sought thereupon Huan, asking his aid and advice, but he was very grave, and saw nothing but folly in the matter. All right. Now, we have here, Jordan points out, her father is noticeably absent in her longings for home. Yeah, she doesn't miss Dad quite so much, does she? Yeah, exactly. But this is kind of a striking passage, right? One of the things that we see throughout the Silmarillion version of the story is Tinúviel's, well, I was about to say dogged, but that seems appropriate under the circumstances, determination to follow Beren and to stay with him no matter what, right? The way in which, it's very clear that Luthien has chosen to cleave to Beren through thick and thin, and no matter what. And that's a huge element, one of the foundational elements of the story of Beren and Luthien as it develops later. We have already seen that high, lofty, transcendent love affair between the two of them is not a central element of this story. We looked at it in looking at the sort of comparatively slow progression of their love, right? The fact that we got only kind of light flirtation with her sort of leading him on, sort of teasing him and luring him into the halls to confront her father. God, we're having all kinds of different problems tonight. All different genres of problems. Sorry, I just crashed there all of a sudden. In a quite unaccountable way. Alright, let's see. What was the last thing you guys heard? So we were talking about how we've already seen last time that this is not contextualized. The main thrust of this story is not the greatest love story of all time, right? That is the main theme, one of the themes anyway, one of the main sort of premise of the Beren and Luthien story. That is not the case. We got to proposal of marriage, right? Beren's spontaneous proposal of marriage. But even then it seems, I guess, spontaneous, more like a lark than anything. His whole appearance there, his whole appearance there was, that is, in Artenor, was just kind of a lark, right? He's just wandering around, because that's what he did, right? And he was braver than most and liked to wander around. Anyway, remember the passage that we looked at last time, which was somewhat shocking, in that it suggests that Beren, when he was in prison, in thraldom to Tevildo, was wishing he'd never met Tinúviel. And that seems like an appalling thing for Beren to say. Why is it appalling? What's appalling about that? Well, it's quite understandable under the circumstances. The only reason it's appalling is that it seems to fall very short of the standard that Beren and Luthien are supposed to maintain, right? Because of the expectations we have coming to it from the Silmarillion. But really, it's a very natural feeling. What he had with Tinúviel wasn't that serious, right? And now he's in a world of hurt. And the same thing, the same reaction, exactly, Jan, it's only appalling in the context of the later version. And the same thing is true here, right? Tinúviel saying to Beren, it's been great, but I need to go home now. Seems kind of appalling. But only in the context of what Luthien does and says in the later version, right? And because we bring to it that expectation. But again, what do we have here? Not just like a second-rate love story compared to the first-rate love story we get in the Silmarillion. Rather, it's a different kind of love story. This is not a story of high destiny. It's not a story of, sort of the great doom of two peoples, whose love for each other enabled them to go far beyond, so many different limits, right? It's not the story we've been reading. It's never been the story we've been reading here. This story, I want to say that it's a very human kind of love story, but in the circumstances, that's a terrible way to describe it. But perhaps you know what I mean by that? That is to say, Beren and Luthien, in the later version, are these, ineffable, lofty characters, so far above anyone reading these, right? And the story of their love, the story of their relationship, is something archetypal, right? It's not like I've never met any two people who act like that, or any relationship that really functions that way. But that's not the point of it. Again, Tom, to go back to your word, it's mythic, right? This is closer to the ground, closer to our perspective. You can kind of imagine, in a fairy tale context, explicitly in a fairy context, as both of them are elves, how this kind of a relationship might happen. Right? They do love each other. They have grown to love each other. And this, kind of seems like, there might be something serious here between Beren and Tinúviel, This might really grow into something. But that's the kind of story that it has been. And this is an interesting stage in that. I love Beren's, perfectly disingenuous and quite adorable, Tinúviel, one thing only can we do. Go get a Silmaril. Hey, let's go get a Silmaril. That'll solve all of our problems. Then we can stay together and you can go home. Wow, let's do that. Why not? Right? Again, none of this and a high doom was upon him or anything like that. Right? Why not is exactly what Curita just said. Yeah, I'm not doing anything else here. Sarah makes a wonderful observation. Sarah King says, it's sort of like two children talking while they play. I have to go home now. No, wait, we'll go get a Silmaril instead, right? Yeah, exactly. I have to go home now. Sarah, there is something childlike in that. And that's explicitly Sarah's right. That's explicitly the context in which we're invited to hear that, right? She's thinking of her mother, singing songs of sweet magic to her children as twilight fell in the woodlands by their ancient halls. Right? She's thinking about her mom, and the song that her mom used to sing to her children. I miss Mom, right? And I miss my brother. And as Jordan points out, not Dad so much. But whatever. Yes, exactly. Alyssa, it is less incalculable and remote. Very good, to use Tolkien's words there. Yeah, good. Yeah. Interesting. Curita has a fabulous observation. She says, Tinúviel calls herself little when she is talking to Melko, and Beren calls her little later on. Yeah, she is kind of little, as Curita says. There's something small and cute about Tinúviel, and extraordinarily admirable as she is in so many ways. Luthien is not little and cute. And again, I think that does help us to make a little bit more concrete the difference in exactly what this kind of story is doing. Now, let's go on, because I find the whole scene with Melko one of the most interesting and kind of complex moments in this story, because it doesn't stay uniform. I think that we can see elements, or I don't know what, forebodings of the direction in which this story is going to grow. So much of this story reads in that little, lower to the ground, smaller scale, more childlike and fairy tale-like tone of story. I think that that's true, but it's not all like that. And I think that it shifts a little bit. And let's look at this. This is the trip to Angmandi. Right, after Tinúviel's like, yeah, let's go get a Silmaril. I agree. Okay. Then did they bid farewell to Huan, and set out for the halls of Melko by easy journeys. For Beren was in great discomfort and heat within the fur of Oikeroi, and Tinúviel's heart became lighter a while than it had been for long, And she stroked Beren or pulled his tail, and Beren was angry because he could not lash it in anger as fiercely as he wished. Now that's just cute, right? I mean, they're being... by the way, for Riddles in the Dark listeners, I couldn't help but think in reading... I had a really funny thought in reading this passage again of all the... discussions we'd had about whether Peter Jackson was going to dress Galadriel in armor, and people were talking about like how awful it would be for Galadriel to like show up at Dol Guldur in a cat suit. And I'm like, well, hey, look, Tolkien did include one of his characters dressed up in a cat suit, but it was a little bit different. Anyway, so so here's Beren in his cat suit. And all the detail about how hot he is inside that thing, and how, like, you know, he wants to lash his tail, but he can't lash his tail because it doesn't have a real tail. It's just a fake. It's just a costume. It's just a skin. You know, again, on the one hand, the first part of this paragraph, the first part of this passage, is a perfect illustration of that much more playful, much more... I mean, these two characters could easily be, what, like 8, maybe? 6 years old? I mean, like, it's a very... That is a very, not just childlike, but a very childish kind of interaction, right? Then watch where we go. At length, however, they drew near to Angamandi, as indeed the rumblings and deep noises and the sound of mighty hammerings of 10,000 smiths labouring unceasingly declared to them. Nigh were the sad chambers where the thrall Noldoli laboured bitterly under the orcs and goblins of the hills. And here the gloom and darkness was great, so that their hearts fell. But Tinúviel arrayed her once more in the dark garment of deep sleep. Now the gates of Angamandi were of iron wrought hideously, and set with knives and spikes, and before them lay the greatest wolf the world has ever seen, even Carcharos Knifefang, who had never slept. And Carcharos growled when he saw Tinúviel approach, but of the cat he took not much heed, for he thought little of cats, and they were ever passing in and out. The two halves of this paragraph are like 1,000 miles apart, aren't they? I mean, the description of Angamandi, especially beginning as we do with this image of the sad chambers where the thrall Noldoli laboured bitterly under the orcs and goblins of the hills. I mean, that's not a 6-year-old or 8-year-old story, right? The chambers where the elf slaves are being kept and forced to work. That's kind of awful, right? As Arthur Harrow says, the childish kids are approaching the entry to nightmare. Absolutely. And I absolutely agree, both Sharon Powell and Carita are pointing out the difference with Carcharos' description. Right? Carita points out that Carcharos is not given faint praise, not that, like, he's braver than most, as is said of Beren, right? But Carcharos Knifefang is not described in those kinds of terms, right? Not at all. And Sharon says is right. Carcharos is mythic. This is a powerfully mythic description. The greatest wolf the world has ever seen, even Carcharos Knifefang. Notice that technique there, where he says the greatest, even Carcharos Knifefang, as if we will have heard of him, right? Like, Carcharos himself. It's like, ooh, right? I mean, that really hits you, right? Like, even you're supposed to recognize it, even if you don't. Who had never slept. Love, that's my favorite part of that whole description, right? Even Carcharos Knifefang, who had never slept. So you've got this really intimidating, powerfully mythic conceptual idea of this unsleeping guardian. This is a different world, right? It's a different world that they're entering into. So our childlike fairy tale story is moving into very different places, right? Now watch what happens when we get there. Melko has just said to Tinúviel, "You don't belong here." "Nay, that I do not yet," said Tinúviel, "though I may perchance hereafter of thy goodness, my lord Melko. Knowest thou not that I am Tinúviel, daughter of Tinúviel the outlaw, and he hath driven me from his halls? For he is an overbearing elf, and I give not my love at his command." Now in truth was Melko amazed that the daughter of Tinúviel came thus of her free will to his dwelling, Angmandi the Terrible, and suspecting something untoward, he asked what was her desire. "For knowest thou not," saith he, "that there is no love here for thy father or his folk, nor needst thou hope for soft words and good cheer from me?" "So hath my father said," said she. "But wherefore need I believe him? Behold, I have a skill of subtle dances, and I would dance now before you, my lord, for then, methinks, I might readily be granted some humble corner of your halls wherein to dwell, until such time as you should call forth the little dancer Tinúviel to lighten your cares." "Nay," saith Melko, "such things are little to my mind, but as thou hast come thus far to dance, dance, and after we will see." And with that he leered horribly, for his dark mind pondered some evil. Okay. What do you make of this? The tone of Tinúviel's comments and the sort of premise, I guess, of her comments sure sounds simple enough, right? The sort of context that the story is giving us to understand this is the build-up to one of the great moments, right? Tinúviel's spell upon Melko himself, which is a very great deed in this story as in the later version. So this is a big deal, right? We're building up to that. But this doesn't sound very epic confrontation-like, right? Indeed, it seems to me to match the tone of Beren's speech before Melko, right? When he's captured and he does his inspired lie, she lies too. And we're told that she also is pardonable for that. We're not told she's explicitly inspired by the Valar, but she's it's okay that she lies to him, we're told. But what do we do with this? What are your thoughts about this passage? Again, I'm thinking especially in the context of the previous one as they're approaching Angmandi. And we have that, now it's a playful childlike fairy tale. Now it's not. Now it's dark and mythic. And pretty grand and sweeping. Again, the description and the stuff about Carcarus. But it doesn't keep going in that direction. It kind of pulls back some. And her, I don't know what she's trying to imply exactly at the beginning. For he is an overbearing elf, and I give not my love at his command. I give not my love at his command. If I were Melko, I would think that she was trying to suggest, my dad wanted to make me marry against my will, but I refused. So I ran away from Dad because he was trying to marry me off to somebody I didn't like. So I came here. Why? Why is how I would summarize his response, right? Knowest thou not that there is no love here for thy father or his folk, nor needst thou hope for soft words and good cheer for me? I'm not your friend. Did you come here thinking you would get shelter or something? like find an ally, reassurance. There, little one, right? Yeah. Good. Chuck says she's feigning naivete. Yes. That or being naive, but I agree. I mean, she's obviously making up a story, so she's clearly feigning, and that is the posture that she's adopting with him. She isn't actually thinking of moving in. She's not actually coming to Angamandi like apartment hunting, as she seems to imply at some points in this discussion. But notice what that shows us, what that suggests. Tinúviel is now deliberately playing the role of the simple, childlike person, right? She's like faking that this is a more simple fairy tale story than it really is, right? Oh, look at little me, right? I'm the little dancer Tinúviel. And why don't you just keep me in a little closet, and whenever you want the little dancer Tinúviel, I will come out and entertain you. I don't know. See, here's the other element, of course. And it's the element that I know is not lost on any of you, as several of you have commented on it already. And we might as well address it square on. How sexually creepy is this scene, in fact? That's the question, right? Okay. Melko's response. Oh no, I'll stick with Melkor, because I was thinking of the Silmarillion. Melkor's response to Luthien in the Silmarillion. I always have always believed, that he is experiencing sexual desire there, that the evil lust that he conceives in his mind is sexual in nature, and that the thing that he's imagining is something really bad. Whether it's rape or marriage or both. Remember, there's precedent for that, mythologically speaking. Melkor taking Luthien, him even kidnapping, raping, both in the ancient and modern sense. That is, in the ancient sense of kidnapping, and in the modern sense, the modern, more sexual sense, or more strictly sexual sense. It's very like Hades and Persephone, really. You've got the dark god of the underworld. Angamandi kind of is hell. Kind of, sort of. It's a little unclear. But anyway, okay. So we've got that mythological precedent for that kind of thing anyway. The horrible... And by the way, sometimes people are sort of wondering why I'm so diffident about that interpretation of the Silmarillion. Like, I think he's really experiencing, sexual lust here. Because, a lot of people are like, dude, it says lust. Like, an evil lust. But that's not actually proof. The word lust is an old word in English. And the traditional use of it, that is, prior to the year 1500, which is like when English is defined according to Tolkien. Like, everything after 1500 is like Johnny-come-lately in the English language, according to Tolkien. The pre-1500 definition of the word lust is simply desire. That's why he says an evil lust, as if you could have good lust, right? In the modern sense, in which the word lust merely means illicit sexual desire, or inappropriate sexual desire, or sinful sexual desire. In that sense, there's no such thing as good lust. So why does he even bother to call it evil lust? No, it's a desire. The word lust was a very vague, sort of general word. You can have lust for anything. You have lust for your dinner. More unsettling to modern readers, if you read Middle English medieval mysticism. You read mystic texts, such as, for instance, The Cloud of Unknowing, my favorite medieval mystic handbook in Middle English. They talk about the lust for God. It just means desire. So the fact that he uses the word lust doesn't, for me, by itself, prove the fact that Melkor is that he's thinking in sexual directions with Luthien. But I think he is. Anyway, here he's leering horribly, and his dark mind pondered some evil. Remember also that, and I think Christopher Tolkien talked about this in Part 1, in the Book of Tales the Book of Lost Tales Part 1. The gods not only have spouses, that is, the Valar not only have spouses, they have children. They actually procreate. Not only Melian, whom, of course, is of that order, and the mom of Tinúviel, so we see that there can be procreative relationships between, the Ainur and the children of Ilúvatar already. But the Valar have children in the Book of Lost Tales world. So this seems the more practical. That is to say, Melko conceiving some kind of plan that involves a sexual union between himself and Tinúviel seems more pragmatic in the Book of Lost Tales context than it does in the Silmarillion context. We don't know what he's planning. We don't have any I see Chuck objects to the sexual line of thought here. If somebody wanted to make an argument that Melko is not thinking in these directions at all, I'd listen to that argument. I mean, I think that there's definitely an argument to be made there. I'm not convinced at this point. And let me clarify something. I don't mean that I think that Melko is like having a spontaneous, sexual or romantic attraction to Tinúviel. Again, I think that's why in the Silmarillion, Tolkien calls it an evil lust. It's twisted even then. But anyway, okay. So here we have the horrible leering and his dark mind pondering some evil. But here's the tricky thing. She brought it up, okay? I mean, if I'm reading that first paragraph, and tell me if you think I'm not reading that first paragraph correctly, I give not my love at his command. She's raised the issue, the marriage issue. It's implicitly and indirectly, admittedly, and as I said, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, doesn't that first paragraph sound like she's saying, Daddy wanted me to marry somebody that I really didn't like, so I ran away and came to you instead? Really? Oh, and can I dance for you, by the way? Now, I'm not suggesting that she's going to do anything skanky in her dancing. I'm not going there. It's not about that. I'm not saying that she's, being a sexually forward woman here. I'm just saying it's on the table, right? I mean, the issue has been raised by her. And again, notice the parallel between her and Beren, right? Beren comes before Melko and he's like, hey, here I am a prisoner, but actually I was coming here to ask for a job anyway, because I think you're awesome, really, and you're pretty much the best around, and I was really hoping I could, find work with you, because that'd be great. I would really like to, sort of have a relationship with you, as, since you're the greatest. she seems to be taking a very similar line, except not in employment so much, but perhaps in marriage. So hath my father said, she says. That is, that, there's no love for his folk here. But wherefore need I believe him? Behold, I have a skill of subtle dances, and I would dance now before you, my lord. Wait, okay. So, Dad said that you didn't like us, right? But I don't believe him. I think maybe you do like us. Behold, I have a skill of subtle I'm a really good, and behold, I'm a really good dancer. And I would dance now before you, my lord. For then methinks I might readily be granted, because then I think you'll let me stay here. If you watch me dance, then I think we can be friends, right? You say there's no love here for my father and his folk. I think that, Dad said the same thing, but I think you might be wrong. I think there might be some love here for my father's folk, if you know what I'm talking about. And if you let me dance for you first, then I think you'll agree and you'll let me stay. Maybe it's like a little studio apartment that's going unused somewhere off in the corner of Agabandi that I could, and then, you could bring me out to dance before you at any time. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that Tinúviel is really actively being a coquette here before Melko. But it's kind of... we're in the ballpark, aren't we? Am I crazy? This was really striking me this last time I read it more than it ever has before. And I keep trying to kind of back off from it, but at the same time I'm like, dude, what else does this mean? If that's not what she's saying, what is she saying? And why is she saying this stuff? She does seem to be flirting with Melko here. But that doesn't seem that doesn't seem beyond the pale. Again, Beren does a similar kind of thing, right? The flattery that he gives to... Both of them flatter Melko, and both of them try to make Melko believe that they think he's awesome and that they really, really want to be with him. Nancy says that she thinks I'm right, but that Tolkien is super circumspect about making that stuff explicit. I agree. It's very circumspect. Absolutely. Such things are little to my mind. Nay, such things are little to my mind, he says. I'm not into that, right? But as thou hast come thus far to dance, dance, and after we will see. And then he does his leering and pondering of evil thing. Sarah King says, Melko is kind of surprisingly polite, too. Saying that dances are little to his mind is kind of hilarious for the supreme power of evil. Yes, that is another thing to notice here. Notice how much less mythically evil Melko is than his house, right? The introduction and description of Carcarus was far more grand and weighty, and sort of mythic in that more extreme end of the spectrum sense, than the description of Melko himself, right? And certainly than the words of Melko himself. He doesn't sound very scary, really. Even that first speech, knowest thou not that there is no love here for thy father or his folk? It's pretty gentle, right? Nor needest thou hope for soft words and good cheer from me. Serious, does Morgoth Bauglir from the Silmarillion ever talk to anybody like that? Right? At least, like when he's sitting there with his iron crown on. Karita says he's more polite than her dad. Yeah, true. Yeah. Now, Suzanne Lander wants to sort of specifying, or wants to sort of clarify that she thinks that Tinúviel is flirting as a form of flattery, as opposed to an open proposition. That seems right to me. Again, I don't think... again, going back to Nancy's point about the circumspection with which Tolkien is talking about this, I think that's not merely a question of Tolkien being sort of shy about it, right? Like, wanting to be like, I'm kind of talking about sex here, but I'm gonna, like, make it sound like I'm not. I mean, it's not even being, it's not even about that. It's within the story itself, right? Luthien doesn't want to say anything that's going to commit her, right? It's not just Tolkien that's being circumspect. It is Tinúviel. Did I call her Luthien? Dang it. It is Tinúviel who is being circumspect as well, right? She doesn't say anything that could commit her. She's not making any promises. She's not making any declarations. She's only making implications, or allowing him to make allowing him to draw conclusions from her words. And so, Suzanne, I'm bringing all these things up as what seems to me to be in support of your argument there, that ultimately the flirtation that she's doing, the kind of pleasant idea that, so the famous Tinúviel, because she is famous, ran away from her father, King Tinúviel, and came to me willingly, and he's shocked to see her there, right? Came to me willingly because she likes me, right? Because maybe she wants me to marry her. That's a little flattering, right? But no positive proposals have been made. Arthur Harrow is thinking of Bilbo and Smaug here. Arthur says, evil is by its nature egotistical, and perhaps this is the earliest version, of that kind of conversation, with the sort of outrageous flirtation, or not flirtation, flattery. Bilbo doesn't go quite so far as flirtation with Smaug. The outrageous flattery that Bilbo delivers to Smaug. Yes. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's keep going. Let's look at her dance. Time to start the dancing. Then did Tinúviel begin such a dance as neither she nor any other sprite or fay or elf danced ever before or has done since. Superlatives. Unqualified superlatives. In fact, underscored superlatives. Notice that? I'll come back to that. And after a while, even Melko's gaze was held in wonder. Round the hall she fared, swift as a swallow, noiseless as a bat, magically beautiful as only Tinúviel ever was, and now she was at Melko's side, now before him, now behind, and her misty draperies touched his face and waved before his eyes, and the folk that sat about the walls or stood in that place were whelmed one by one in sleep, falling down into deep dreams of all that their ill hearts desired. Beneath his chair the adders lay like stones, and the wolves before his feet yawned and slumbered, and Melko gazed on enchanted, but he did not sleep. Then began Tinúviel to dance a yet swifter dance before his eyes. And even as Gwendolen had taught her long ago, a song that the youths and maidens sang beneath the cypresses of the gardens of Lorien, when the tree of gold had waned, and Silpion was gleaming. The voices of nightingales were in it, and many subtle odours seemed to fill the air of that noisome place, as she trod the floor lightly as a feather in the wind. Nor has any voice or sight of such beauty ever again been seen there, and I knew Melko, for all his power and majesty, succumbed to the magic of that elf maid, and indeed even the eyelids of Lorien had grown heavy had he been there to see. Then did Melko fall forward drowsed, and sank at last in utter sleep, down from his chair upon the floor, and his iron crown rolled away. All right. First, our superlatives, right? I point those out, of course, because you'll recall, and a couple of you were referring earlier to the sort of faint praise that was given to them at the beginning of the story. We're not there anymore, right? It's not like, yeah, she was like one of the three most, it's not like that. Kurita particularly likes magically beautiful as only Tinúviel ever was. Yeah. And Kurita, that's an important one. Because that seems to be... It's not only that we're now getting a superlative in the story that we didn't get before, but it's like the lack of superlatives from before is being corrected. Right? As only Tinúviel ever was. That wasn't said of her at the beginning of the story. Right? It seems to be one of the... I would hold that up as a piece of evidence that the story is already growing in the telling, right? Moving down that spectrum from fairy tale towards myth, becoming higher and loftier. Tom asks, is this the birth of Luthien? Something close to that. She's certainly closer to Luthien here, I think, than we've seen her pretty much in the entire rest of the story. Good, yet Thomas says the tone in this passage regains its mythic quality. I agree. There's a shift back from the conversation. The conversation is not very mythic at all. And again, the thing that I would emphasize, one thing that we've seen, that I've mentioned before, which I think is a pretty common trope in fairy tales of the simpler kind, is clever heroes, right? Coming up with a clever thing to say in order to fool somebody at a crucial moment. That's a pretty common fairy tale element, right? That's the direction that Tinúviel is going in her conversation. Right? I'm going to make him think I'm flirting with him. And I'm going to make him think maybe I'm interested in marrying him, so that he'll let me dance before him, as my little audition, right? And that's when I'll get him. That's a very fairy tale kind of trope, right? But I agree with you, Thomas, that we shift out of that mode here, and are in a much more mythic mode in this description. Interesting. Chuck is thinking about this. Chuck Snow says, has she created a singular event like Feanor's Silmarils, never to be, created again? Well, of course, by its nature, it isn't exactly like that. But it is. I mean, it's a performance not to be equaled, right? I mean, that business about even Lorien himself would have been not taken in by it, but affected by it. A couple of you are pointing to the reference to the bat. Christopher Tolkien mentions that as is it possible that this is where the idea of the Thorin Gwethil, the vampire bat, came from? Maybe. Don't know. Don't know don't know that for sure. But it is certainly, at the very least, it's kind of an interesting, sort of amusing coincidence, if it is a coincidence. Kurita says, so why didn't Beren and Tinúviel just grab the crown and run? We'll see the answer to that in just a second. Actually, let's go ahead and look at that. Suddenly Tinúviel ceased. In the hall no sound was heard, save of slumbrous breath. Even Beren slept beneath the very seat of Melko. But Tinúviel shook him so that he awoke at last. Then in fear and trembling, he tore asunder his disguise, and freeing himself from it, leapt to his feet. Now does he draw that knife that he had from Tevildo's kitchens, and he seizes the mighty iron crown. But Tinúviel could not move it, and scarcely might the thews of Beren avail to turn it. Great is the frenzy of their fear, as in that dark hall of sleeping evil Beren labours as noiselessly as may be to prize out a Silmaril with his knife. Now does he loosen the great central jewel, and the sweat pours from his brow. But even as he forces it from the crown, lo, his knife snaps with a loud crack. So, answer, it's way too big to run away with, right? It's huge. But that itself, again, in my mind, now here all of a sudden, we're back again in the fairy tale world. Think of the images here. The huge crown, right? So big that as it's rolled off the giant head of Melko, that they can't pick it up, and Beren can barely turn it, right, to access the Silmarils. Then he pulls out his knife, which has no name. It's just a kitchen knife, right? It's the knife that he took from Tevildo's kitchen. And the kind of, I don't know, humility of that. Not humility in the sense of like the virtue of humility, but the like, I am the hero of humble background who with my trusty kitchen knife will prize out the Silmaril from the iron crown of Melko. It feels very, very Jack and the Beanstalk, doesn't it? In fact, this whole scene reminds me of Jack and the Beanstalk. Like, that whole sense of like, you know, we are children who have sneaked into the hall of a sleeping giant, right? And we're hoping he won't wake while we try to like wrest this gem from the from his crown with my kitchen knife. This is we're again back in that simpler childlike fairy tale kind of story here. I think again, this is where again, you know, the point, as I said, what I find so fascinating about the whole Melko's throne room section is the way that it goes back and forth. It feels like the story is kind of sort of losing its identity, or its initial identity anyway, or rather freely mingled in. It doesn't permanently lose it. Again, we're still there. This passage here, this sounds like feels like a very natural culmination to the let's go get a Silmaril, right? Won't that be fun? And the pulling his cat's tail and stuff as we get there. And it ends with him like breaking his kitchen knife trying to pull the Silmaril off this huge crown while they're like, shh, don't wake the giant. And Nancy's pointing to the sweat pouring from his brow. Yeah, he's braver than most, but you know. Anyway, it's we're still in that world, but we're not permanently in it. We keep you know, he keeps sort of modulating out of it, right? Pulling us out of that particular kind of mode and inviting us you know, to begin to see these moments, especially that the moment of Tinúviel's dancing, especially the initial description of Angmandi and Carcarus in this much more exalted and mythic light. And again, I think this is just kind of different impulses within Tolkien. The story seems to have its frame is within that fairy tale mode. That's what we've seen from the beginning. But it doesn't stay perfectly true to that all the way through. The sort of first tastes of the mythic quality that it will come to have keep popping out of it. Now, look at popping out in it, I mean to say. Let's look at the this is sort of the scene which is kind of the bookend. The very first one we looked at, the I want to go home passage. This is after they've escaped and Beren's lost his hand. And by the way, notice that, you know, he doesn't present the the Silmaril dramatically in his hand. He's just like trying to punch the wolf in the head, you know, and it grabs him and bites his hand off, and he's like, oh shoot. Not only did he eat my hand, that was the hand that had the Silmaril in it, for crying out loud. Okay. At last came there nevertheless a day, whereon, waking out of a deep slumber, Beren started up as one who leaves a dream of happy things, coming suddenly to his mind. And he said, Farewell, O Huan, most trusty comrade, and thou, little Tinúviel, whom I love, fare thee well. This only I beg of thee. Get thee now straight to the safety of thy home, and may good Huan lead thee. But I, lo, I must away into the solitude of the woods, for I have lost that Silmaril which I had, and never dare I draw near to Angmandi more, wherefore neither will I enter the halls of Tinúviel. Then he wept to himself, but Tinúviel, who was nigh and had hearkened to his musing, came beside him and said, Nay, now is my heart changed, and if thou dwellest in the woods, O Baron Ermabwed, then so will I. And if thou wilt wander in the wild places, there will I wander also, or with thee, or after thee. Yet never shall my father see me again, save only if thou takest me to him. Then indeed was Beren glad at her sweet words, and fain would he have dwelt with her as a huntsman of the wild. But his heart smote him for all that she had suffered for him, and for her he put away his pride. Indeed, she reasoned with him, saying it would be folly to be stubborn, and that her father would greet them with naught but joy, being glad to see his daughter alive. And maybe, said she, he will have shame that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaws of Carcarus. On the one hand, we don't have any more of that, it's been nice, Beren, but I want to go home thing, right? We're past that. And, the love story has progressed beyond that, right? This is the one passage in which we seem to get, if there are those other moments we've been discussing where we get kind of a foretaste of the epic stature that these characters in this story is gonna have eventually down the road, this is the place where we get a foretaste of their relationship being equally lofty, right? But it's still just a foretaste. Chuck is asking me if I say on one hand, is that a joke or a pun? No, I that was an accident. Perhaps a fortuitous one. Yeah. But notice, it's not a pure kind of modulation, right? Like in that description of Angamandi, and that, the description of Carcarus, there isn't really, it doesn't go back to the child. Once it shifts from the childlike pulling of tails and that kind of thing, once we shift from that to, the chambers where the thrall Noldui are kept, and even Carcarus, Knife Fang, it stays there, right? It does, but this doesn't stay there. Maybe he will have shame that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaws of Carcarus. Jesting? Oh yeah. He did kind of toss that out there, didn't he? He said it in scorn, as a joke, right? Again, in the Silmarillion, Thingol's, stipulation that Beren should get a Silmaril is characterized by Melian as cunning counsel, right? A way that he can contrive to save his oath that he would not harm Beren, and yet send Beren to his death. So he has devised cunning counsel. It's not cunning counsel in the Tale of Tinúviel. Tinúviel calls it on several occasions a jest, a joke, right? That he was laughing at Beren and just kind of said this to make fun of him. And and she continues on that line here. Maybe he will have shame, seeing that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaws of Carcarus. Well, if you really think he was just joking, gosh, maybe the answer to, hey, let's go get a Silmaril, should have been, no, why don't we just go talk to Dad again? Maybe he'll be over that whole joking thing. Maybe we can talk Dad into taking this seriously, for crying out loud. So anyway, I find that sort of tone at the end a little bit, well, not really in keeping with the tone that the two of them both achieve. Lo, I must away into the solitude of the woods, for I have lost that Silmaril which I had. and never dare I draw near to Angamonde more, and therefore neither will I enter the halls of Tinúviel. If thou dwellest in the woods, O Beren Ermabwed, then so will I, and if thou wilt wander in the wild places, there will I wander also, or with thee, or after thee. Yet never shall my father see me again, save only if thou takest me to him. I mean, that's good stuff. And maybe he'll have shame that his jesting has given thy fair hand to the jaws of Carcarus. It's just a different register. It's uneven, and again, I don't mean that as a criticism of saying, like, Caesar's, take this back to, do some more revising here, Tolkien. That's not my point. It's that I think that we can see both of these elements kind of coming together, and what I see happening is this is that fairy tale story, and we see again it still retains that whole fairy tale flavor, but it has these moments that it lifts upwards from that, and that's going to be the trajectory of this story, and not just of this story, but in a sense really of all of the whole Lost Tales content. Well, I want to shift now to looking at the ending. And we're going to look at these sort of more briefly. But this really, to me, comes back to the big question. What's this story about in the end? What kind of story is this? That we're not just the sort of the genre and the tone. We've been talking about that. But what's the purpose? Like, what are you telling when you're telling this story? For context, remember the introduction that we get here in the beginning of the Silmarillion version of the story? And it's one of the only stories that gets an introduction like this. Normally, the Silmarillion just segues straight into the story. But we get this really unusual sort of narrative pause at the beginning of the Beren and Luthien story. Among the tales of sorrow and of ruin that come down to us from the darkness of those days, there are yet some in which, amid weeping, there is joy, and under the shadow of death, light that endures. And of these histories, most fair still in the ears of the elves, is the tale of Beren and Luthien. Yeah, Nick, exactly. It's a story of hope, right? Among the tales of... So, there's a whole bunch of tales of sorrow and ruin that come back down to us from the darkness of those days, right? Like, they're all pretty sad, and they're all pretty ruinous, but with some of them, amidst the weeping and the shadow of death, there's joy and light that endures, right? And the most fair in the ears of the elves of all of these is the story of Beren and Luthien. So, okay, so it's the shadow of death is there, right? There's weeping, but there's joy amid the weeping. There's light under the shadow of death. So ultimately, the story of Beren and Luthien is the story of hope. We see this in action, right? In the Fellowship of the Ring. Remember, this is what, I think this is such an important moment. Such an important moment because so revelatory of Tolkien's concept of the Beren and Luthien story. Remember, in the dell under Weathertop, with the Black Riders closing in and fear threatening to grip the hearts of the hobbits, Strider says, first the hobbits are asking for a story, and Sam sings the song of the song about Gil-galad, and Frodo's going to tell the story of Gil-galad. At first, this seems like a good idea, right? Because it's a story of the defiance of the darkness. Like, hey, let's remember when the Dark Lord was overthrown. That seems like that might cheer us up a bit under the circumstances, right? Remember, Aragorn steps in and is like, no, we shouldn't talk about that. Instead, I will tell you the story of Beren and Luthien. And he tells it first in verse and then in prose, right? So we see this is exactly how Aragorn himself is applying this story. And I think it's such an important thing. I was really delighted when I saw the extended edition of The Fellowship of the Ring and saw that Peter Jackson had in fact included a bit of Aragorn like singing about... But the context gets entirely stripped of this context, right? It's just sort of like a song that Aragorn is singing to himself, really because he's thinking about Arwen, right? Though I love in Peter Jackson's Aragorn gives the most the most concise synopsis of the Luthien story ever, right? The 2-word one, she died. All right, fair enough. Okay, got it. Anyway, and yeah, Nick, as you say, the Black Riders don't attack until the story is finished. It is almost as if they're waiting for the story of Beren and Luthien to be done before they attack. Not that they're listening and enjoying it, but because as if it repels them in some way. Kind of makes one wonder, like, hey, Aragorn, why did you tell the long version? Actually, but anyhow, I think it's really it's a fascinating moment. But again, particularly fascinating because it illustrates the kind of application that the Beren and Luthien story has within Tolkien's world, right? By that time in his conception. Again, it's about hope. Estelle. Which seems appropriate. Now, the question is, what's the Tale of Tinúviel about? What is the effect? What's the end result of the Tale of Tinúviel? Can the same thing be said of the Tale of Tinúviel? So, let's look at the endings. And I want to do this, I said we're going to do it briefly, and we are, but I want to do this in full. That is, we're going to look at the whole end of the tale here, bit by bit, or rather sort of version by version, because it's kind of interesting the way it unfolds. Okay, so Vianna, you may remember, is the girl who is telling this story from the beginning. So this is her ending of the story. Now then, they covered the leafy boughs whereon he lay with soft raiment, and they bore him away to the halls of the king. And there was Tinúviel awaiting him in great distress. And she fell upon Beren's breast, and wept, and kissed him. And he awoke, and knew her. And after Mablung gave him that Silmaril, and he lifted it above him, gazing at its beauty, ere he said slowly and with pain, Behold, O king, I give thee the wondrous jewel thou didst desire, and it is but a little thing, found by the wayside. For once, methinks, thou hadst one beyond thought more beautiful, and she is now mine. Yet even as he spake, the shadows of Mandos lay upon his face, and his spirit fled in that hour to the margin of the world, and Tinúviel's tender kisses called him not back. Then did Vianna suddenly cease speaking, and Ariel sadly said, A tale of ruth for so sweet a maid to tell. But behold, Vianna wept, and not for a while did she say, Nay, that is not all the tale, but here endeth all that I rightly know. Okay? That's a sad ending. Really sad, right? I mean, seriously, his last words are, and she is now mine. And then he dies? Like, seriously? That's awful. That's just terrible. And so she dies, and everybody lives sadly ever after. Now, Vianna says that's not all the tale. There's more to it than that, right? So she's not really saying that that's it. But it's all that she rightly knows. That is, it's all that she has by heart, as we'll see her clarify later on. But it is fascinating that the very first, the first stopping point that we get for this is of a very sad... It's a little surprising, isn't it? This story at no point really sounded like it was building up to tragedy. I mean, thinking of Beren and Luthien's lighthearted, playful story and flirtation and everything, and all of their different adventures, and it all comes down in the end to he dies having just said she is now mine before they could ever marry her. I mean, wow. That's really bad. And Nancy says, I like the implication that this was so sad she couldn't bear to continue memorizing. I agree, Nancy. I mean, she says, that's not all the tale, but here endeth all that I rightly know. It does lead you to sort of suspect, since she's weeping, it does lead you to like, I can't go on, right? So the fact that that's not all the tale, at first gives the impression it gets even worse or something, right? Like, it's so sad. I can't even, no, I can't. Like, I'm out. I'm done. Like, that's it. That's all I can bear to memorize. Then, what happens? Okay, then Aesir pipes in. Other children there spake, and one said, Lo, I have heard that the magic of Tinúviel's tender kisses healed Beren, and recalled his spirit from the gates of Mandos, and long time he dwelt among the lost elves, wandering in the glades of love with sweet Tinúviel. Well, that's more cheerful, right? I mean, I'm gonna tell you, that sounds, like, let's do that, right? All we need to add is, and they lived happily ever after, right? I mean, that's a happily ever after ending if ever I heard one, right? I mean, it kind of pivots right on the edge of tragedy. It looks like he's about to die, or he does, like, get mostly dead or something, but then she kisses him and he wakes up again and is healed, and hooray! I mean, there we have a fairy tale ending of our fairy tale story. That sounds much more like the kind of ending we've been building up to all along, right? So on the one hand, it's a less striking, less moving ending than Viane's actual than the place where Viane stopped, and what she seemed to be implying through her tears about the rest of the story. But it's more satisfying in this sense, right? But there's more, right? But another said, Nay, that was not so, O Aesir, and if thou wilt listen, I will tell the true and wondrous tale. For Beren died there in Tinúviel's arms, even as Viane has said. Oh, so our hopes of happily ever after are crushed. And Tinúviel, crushed with sorrow, and finding no comfort or light in all the world, followed him swiftly down those dark ways that all must tread alone. Oh, so this is the sad part that Viane didn't learn by heart, right? Not only does Beren die, then Tinúviel dies too. We're going to soften that by speaking poetically of those dark ways that all must tread alone, but okay, so he dies, and then she dies of sorrow. Yeah, it's worse, all right. Okay, anyway, but carry on. Now her beauty and tender loveliness touched even the cold heart of Mandos, so that he suffered her to lead Beren forth once more into the world. Nor has this ever been done since to man or elf, and many songs and stories are there of the prayer of Tinúviel before the throne of Mandos, that I remember not right well. Yet said Mandos to those twain, Lo, O elves, it is not to any life of perfect joy that I dismiss you, for such may no longer be found in all the world where sits Melko of the evil heart. And know that ye will become mortal, even as men. And when ye fare hither again, it will be forever, unless the gods summon you indeed to Valinor. Nonetheless, those twain departed hand in hand, and they fared together through the northern woods, and oftentimes they were seen dancing magic dances down the hills, and their name can be heard far and wide. Look, he learned how to dance, right? She taught him. She said she was going to teach him how to dance. Looks like they got around to that. Isn't that nice? So, we have the simple sad ending. He died, tragically, and she died too. Okay. Then we have the simple happy ending. No, he got better and they lived happily ever after. And now we have the middle ground. Neither. Both. Sad and happy endings. Ambiguous, Yana, I agree with that. The change of status is really fascinating here. Notice that it's it's not a punishment, right? I mean, it's not like they're being doomed to be mortal like men because they did something wrong or something like that, right? So it's not like that exactly, but it's his emphasis. Lo, O elves, it is not to any life of perfect joy that I dismiss you. It's like it's almost like what Mandos is saying here is, all right, I'm going to let you guys live again, and go back to the world. But don't think I'm saying and they lived happily ever after, right? There will be no living happily ever after here. You're going to kind of live happily for a while. But you are going to live happily, but not forever after, right? So I'm going to give you half of the fairy tale ending, but I'm going to deny you the other half. Okay, I'll give you the happily, but I'm going to deny you the ever after. Okay? Alright, that's what I'm going to do. I'm relenting. But I'm not going to just reverse things. I'm just going to make sad things come untrue. I'm going to send you back, but I'm going to strip you of your immortality. Both of you. And you're going to be like mortal people, and when you fare hither again, it will be forever unless the gods summon you indeed to Valinor. Now, in the commentary, you will have noticed that Christopher Tolkien gets really cherry at this point. He says that the what did he say? Eschatology of it. That is what Tolkien says about the ultimate destiny of the souls of elves and men at this time was really in flux, and it's pretty unclear. So it's really hard to draw firm conclusions about what exactly all this stuff means. But based on other references, Christopher Tolkien is a little less full in his description of this than he is in some places about other things. But basically, the elves, when they die, their spirits go to Mandos, but then they're released, and they get reincarnated in the bodies of their descendants. That was the original idea, which is still in play at this time. Tolkien doesn't seem to have changed his mind about that. So it leads, as a joke that I've made so many times before, that like it leads to the bizarre situation where, the elvish couple has a baby and they come out and they're like, hey, it's grandpa, right? That's how it works, is the spirit of your departed relative comes back in your children. It comes back through their family line. Not like, the spirit of grandpa is strong in this one, but like it's literally grandpa who was just born again. And that's like, thinking about it in practical terms to me is all kinds of weird, but that's so they can escape and they can come back, and they're still immortal, right? It's just, sort of the cycle continues. They're not going to have any of that. That's what he means when they're going to have to stay here. But some men are enabled. Some men are kind of caged up in Mandos or something. Again, really unclear. Don't really know for sure. But some of them get they get like outings to Valinor, apparently. And that's what he says. He says that's what he means, apparently, when he says, unless the gods summon you indeed to Valinor. Maybe you'll get to go to Valinor. But, you stand no more chance of that than, the other mortal men will do. The transformation of their destiny seems to be a way of moderating. I was joking about the half of the happily ever after thing, but that's what it really seems to me to be. It's like of moderating their bliss, right? I'm not just going to undo it. I'm going to give you a happy ending, but there shall remain an element of sadness, an element of tragedy. The happiness of your ending is going to be qualified. It's going to be moderated by this grief. Again, this is a place where Beren's race is enormous, right? And this is where I started talking about, talking about this tale. And, is where I want to finish ending, talking about this tale. This is, to me, the primary reason why the race of Beren has a bigger impact than any other element of this entire story. Because just the difference there is so huge. The difference between, I will let you return, but it will be at but Luthien, there's a cost, right? I will grant you what you ask, but you have to be willing. I will only do it on condition that you become mortal. So if you are going to join yourself to Beren, you have to leave behind your kindred. I mean, the sacrifice that's involved for Luthien is enormous. There's no sacrifice being made here. It's not about, again, it's not like the final and ultimate sort of tribute to their love for each other and her commitment to him. It's merely sort of a consequence that's doled out to both of them together. It changes the story so much. Again, I don't think there's any element that there is no more radical difference. There is no more transformative element of the story than the changing of Beren from elf to man. For this way. Now, Vayanna gets the last word again. And thereat that boy ceased, and Vayanna said, Aye, and they did more than dance, for their deeds afterward were very great, and many tales are there thereof, that thou must hear, O Ariel Melanon, upon another time of tale-telling. For those twain it is, that stories name E Cuilwarthon, which is to say, the dead that live again, and they became mighty fairies in the lands about the north of Syria. Oh, interesting. So the more that she knew, but doesn't know by heart, were not just sad, right? She knows of the greatness of their deeds afterwards. But she never learned those. Or at least she does. She says, you must learn it at other story. But I don't. She said this is all she knows, rightly, right? When she stopped before. Why didn't she learn these other bits? I don't know. It's very intriguing. A couple of you are suggesting, is this Tolkien kind of himself trying out multiple endings? I mean, in a sense, yes, of course, that is what he's doing. I don't think that means, does this mean he's being, like, actively indecisive? Like, he writes the ending, like, like, okay, and then they all die at the end. I don't really like that. Cross out the end and just say, somebody else says, no, wait, actually, they don't die. Happily ever after. I don't like that either. I'll do a different one. I don't think it's that spontaneous. I mean, again, it's one of the things that make the Lost Tales, to me, really fascinating, because they have that extra layer that the Silmarillion just doesn't have. That is, it has the frame. And this kind of disagreement and discussion among the frame characters as to what is the true right version of the story adds this really cool extra layer to the stories. So the disagreement among them about the endings, I am very reluctant to see that as like a spontaneous act of sort of revision on Tolkien's part or rethinking on Tolkien's part. But it's but rather it's a part of the whole frame is going to be this divide, and the way that he sets that up seems perfectly sensible. Like, sad for one hears that it's that the tales ended sadly, the other hears that it simply ended happily, and the third version, which seems to have more authority than either of the other two, especially when Vayanna comes back and essentially endorses it here at the end. The original teller endorses this one, making it pretty much the official ending of the story. But still, it it enables Tolkien sort of working this out among, in the frame to give. It invites us to think about it on an entirely different level, right? We have the progress of our understanding of the understanding of these tale tellers and of Ariel, who's receiving these tales and who will in turn himself be transmitting these tales back to the world of men. That is, this is how we're getting them. And so one of the sort of dramas, one of the sort of subplot of the frame narrative is Ariel sort of seeking and discovering these, the true versions of these stories. So anyway, I think it has a lot more to do with that kind of stuff than the other. But anyhow, where we end up at the end, or rather I should say where Beren and Luthien end up at the end, becoming mighty fairies in the land, that's not where it seemed like we were headed. Again, that second ending, the happily ever after ending, that's the one that seems to fit best with the rest of the story. I mean, if you kind of take the whole story and then you like put these three endings sort of side by side and say which one fits best, like little flashcards, like which one of these tales fits best onto this animal, right? My youngest son always really loved that kind of book where you would like mix and match pictures and do really funny pictures of a scorpion tail on a lion or something like that. That kind of fantastical thing has always amused my youngest son very much. It's not that this is a fantastical hybrid creature like that exactly, but it's that second one that seems like the natural tale of this animal, right? Or the natural ending of this tale, to use the pun. But instead, what do we see? A transformation. As Beren and Luthien are transformed into mortal creatures, their story itself rises up a peg, right? As they're brought down, their story goes up. Anyway, I do definitely think that there is a discernible movement towards the grander mythic view in this story, which really does not begin that way, and even never consistently rises there. It's way too simple to say like the Book of Lost Tales is really just like a bunch of fairy tale stories, which is like eventually going to become mythic again, because that's not it exactly. They're mythic from the beginning, explicitly mythic. But this story is sort of more fairy tale than most. But even it, we see being kind of drawn upward as we go along. Well, I'm going to let you go, and I'm glad that my voice got a little bit better and I survived through the class. That was good. For next time, we're going to do two like we did 2 classes on Tinúviel. We're going to do 2 classes on the Turambar story, the Turambar chapter. I'm going to invite you to. You don't have to read the whole. I mean, it's quite long, of course. It's the Turambar story, after all. We're going to talk about up through when he goes back and kills Broda, looking for his mom. That's where we're going to stop. So in the in my edition, anyway, and many with the bigger edition, the trade paperback editions are pretty similar. It's page 91. But anyway, so right after he goes back and he slays Broda in his hall, that's where we're going to. So we're going to talk about the story leading up to there, and so read that, and then also read the notes and commentary that relate to those earlier sections, and then we'll look at the conclusion of the story. We'll get to the incest and suicide a week after next. So, okay. If you have questions or comments that you would like to add, as Jana's pointing out, I haven't scheduled. In the last few classes, I've scheduled extra bonus sessions for Q&A and stuff, and I didn't do that in this class in part because I'm feeling the impulse to kind of get along a little bit. And I'm already taking 10 weeks on this class, which is more than I scheduled for the Book of Lost Tales Part 1. So since I'm kind of taking it more slowly all the way through, I thought we could do without them. But that doesn't mean I want to discourage you from sending in questions for us to discuss. So I do want to encourage you to, by email, send me questions. I'd be happy to, for instance, begin next week with a little segment on some questions that you guys had about Tinúviel, if you want to do that. So I'm very happy to kind of work that in as we go along, and we'll see if we can manage. We're still on schedule so far, so I feel good about that. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you for your good wishes for my improving health moving forward here. So I'm going to go to bed now, see if I can feel a little bit better tomorrow. But I should be better, I hope, next week. Thank you, everybody, and good night, and we will see you I hope you're feeling better for the cheerful story we will be talking about next week. I don't think we'll have any of our happily ever after issues starting next week. So thanks very much, everybody. Good night.